Okay, so we're ready to soak our clutches for the 2 clutch packs in the transmission. We want to put enough transmission fluid in this pan that it covers the bottom. And then we're going to take our primary clutches and drop them in. And as long as we have enough fluid to cover them, that should be about all we need. So we'll keep putting our clutches in there. And just adding a little bit of fluid if it's not enough to cover it yet. Probably will end up being a quart. Depends how flat the surface you're on is. And I'm going to go ahead and add them to the pile in here. Those must have been some of the overdrive clutches. And I need to add a little more fluid. Make sure I can cover all these discs. And go ahead and place all of these size discs in here. These other 3 go in the secondary clutch pack. I might need to rearrange them slightly to get this last one submerged. Could have done this before I submerged them to make sure I was doing it right. Might have been a good move. Maybe that'll be a move that you can undertake. Just going to go ahead and put a socket on there just to help it get submerged. Cool. And hopefully you can get them to stay submerged. So we want these to sit overnight so that they can absorb as much of all of this into the frictive material as they need to. And I'm just going to cover it up because I don't want any lint or airborne bullshit getting into the transmission fluid. Alright, so you're going to leave that overnight and come back tomorrow to assemble your clutch packs. Okay, so now we're about ready to rebuild our 2 clutch packs. These are the 2 clutch packs. One fits on top of the other. And you can just take this clutch pack and lift it off. You'll notice there's a bearing inside. If that bearing's messed up, you may need a master rebuild kit to replace it. And you'll see that there is a wavy snap ring inside here that holds it in place. And then that wavy snap ring has a very small notch in one end of it. So I can take one screwdriver and place it near the end. So I've got it started, and then go around the edge, moving it in and up. And gradually you should be able to get the snap ring to come up and then pull it out. It's barely got very much wave to it. It's almost flat at this point. But it is slightly wavy, so we want to set it off to the side exactly as it came out. And then we want to pull off our first clutch plate. A few different ways to get it out of there. It's got some suction on it. In any case, it comes relatively straight out. Set it off to one side. And then our first frictive disc, our first actual frictive clutch, comes out the same way. We'll pull it off. Mind you, we want to put these in exactly the same order. So I'm working backwards. I'm going to stack them so that I can then put them back, stacking them the same way. So our second clutch plate. The next frictive disc, or clutch. And here's our third plate. And our fourth disc. And here's our fourth plate. And our last disc. You can see there's still a plate in the bottom there. If you want to take it out, it might be easier just to flip the whole thing. Smack it. Just be sure not to flip it over. And you can check in there and make sure you don't have any debris, any schmutz that you want to get rid of. Okay, so this spring in here needs to be compressed so that we can get to the seals and the piston in the front clutch pack. And you could do this with a shop press, or you could do this a number of different ways. I have a couple of pieces of metal here that I'm going to use to compress this with a standard clamp. And you want to disassemble the front clutch correctly. What you need is Special Tool C-3863-A to compress the front spring retainer and take off the snap ring. Alright, so without using a shop press, I'm going to take a piece of metal and shim the outside, or a piece of wood, something to give it a little bit of insulation from the clamp. Place it like so. You can see my brake and my snap ring is over there, so I'm across from it right now. I'm going to just catch the edge of this spring with one clamp right here. And as you tighten it, you may need to place something behind it to take up the difference in space so it doesn't just slip off. I'm going to take a washer and put it in there. Doesn't really matter what it is, so long as it helps it stay in place. As you tighten down on it. As soon as you start to see a gap, you're far enough. And remember, you do need a slight amount of room to get the actual snap ring out of there. Just showing you this way to do it because it's how I learned without a shop press, and that's something you might not always have. Of course, I need to line it up so that my washer stays behind it. Okay, so once both sides appear to have moved some, snap ring should have a gap on either side of it. And it should be able to be removed. Sometimes one of these might get in your way in removing the snap ring. Just try to remember, you don't want to bend it any more than you have to. Might be a lot easier to go behind one of these little keepers, so that way you know that the clamp is not going to get in its way. You're trying to take it off. You can see on the other side I went behind the keeper. And there's a little bit of compression, cool. really not very much required to get it off of there. It's got to release the spring. Now in this case, after pulling it up a little bit, still need to move it out. And you can see my clamp is still slightly in the way. Maybe I can try rotating the snap ring a little bit without the pressure on it. Might be easier to get it started. Take your time, don't bend or mar anything. You can get behind it like so on one side. You may be able to work that around and pull the entire thing off. Looks like in this instance I still can't move the snap ring where I'd like to. So instead I need to work it around until the gap is at the location where I'm pulling it off from. You can see that I've got one end up over it. If I keep pushing, it'll snap off. So rotating it might be a little bit easier. Alright, so now I'm going to gradually uncompress the spring with my two insane and crazy clamps here. And mind you, you don't want it to smack you, so be careful. It's not a lot of pressure, but it is some. There's one half of it, and there's it free. Hopefully we didn't damage the back surface at all. That's what my block of wood was for, and what my washers were for. See the part that popped off there has little notches that face up to help us get that snap ring off. And I'm going to go ahead and place that face down like all my other things. Take the spring off. And the spring shouldn't matter, but just in case, I'm going to place it face down. Now everything that's come out has been flipped over. And I'm going to reach in there and pull out the front clutch piston. So the front clutch piston has a seal on it. You can see right now it's facing skyward, the lip of the seal. We want to pull this seal all the way out. Remember which way it's facing. And go get its counterpart from our kit. Go ahead and put aside our old one. And place our new seal back in there exactly the same way. And if we take a look in here on the inside, there is a second seal. This seal has to be worked past a couple of grooves here. So make sure you know which way the lip is facing. In this case it's toward the back of the clutch pack. And we're just going to work it out of its groove. Alright, we see it was facing like so. We're going to go back over to our kit. Find the seal that matches this size one. And we're going to go ahead and reinstall it by stretching it over this part. And we've got to keep an eye on it and make sure that when we put it in, it's perfectly flat the way that it's supposed to be. So I usually will start one side and then work it around, stretching it, because otherwise it just tends to want to roll and we're not going to be certain it's facing the right direction. Okay, so lip is facing towards the back. Get in there and clean out everything a little bit. Let's get any dust, effective material out of there. Now we'll take some petroleum jelly and put it on that seal. And we'll take some petroleum jelly and put it on the piston seal, on the actual piston, to help us get it installed. And a lot like the rear clutch pack seal, we need a feeler gauge to help us to install this properly. So we're going to put it all the way until it's close. This instance, we're not fighting the close seal as much, or the inner seal as much, because it's at least facing the right direction. But once we start to get close, we need to take a feeler gauge and go around the outside edge. I'm using a .008 inch feeler gauge. And we want to get it between the piston and the housing. No, there's not a lot of space in there. And we're rotating this. .008 is a little thick and won't get in there. I'm going to try with the .006 feeler gauge. Might even use a pick behind it to shove it in past the seal. Okay, once it's past the seal, should be able to rotate the whole thing. And hopefully push that skirt nice and flat. We'll keep rotating it. The feeler gauge pushed past it. Okay, and so hopefully now it's all the way down in there. If I can't see any piece of the seal that I've broken off, it's a good sign that it is now reinstalled correctly. I'll go ahead and get in there and clean things off a bit. Those are my two new seals and my front clutch pack installed. Now I'm going to put the spring back and snap ring guide back. Now here comes the really fun part. We're going to recompress this spring on either side in such a way that it lets me put the snap ring back on. Now if you have a chop press and can put something in there, you're still going to need to set it up so that it pushes on the outside of it. Okay, now back to the wonderful world of trying to compress this spring again so that we can reassemble the clutch pack. We're on the front clutch pack. And I'm going to put a clamp behind this part. I've got a plate on the back of the clutch pack to keep from marring it. And I'm going to put a little piece of wood behind the edge of the clutch to keep it from slipping off, hopefully. I was using a big washer before, but it was not staying put very good. I'll just go ahead and compress it some so that when I go to set up the other side it stays put. Then heading over to the other side, putting a second clamp on it. Working 180 degrees from my first clamp. This might take some patience. And it might not be ideal. But in any case, you want to watch the spring as you gradually compress it. Make sure that you don't slip off on either one of these. And as you get closer to having it aligned, you may need to do a little correction. So I'm going to take a screwdriver and squish it over until it looks like it's going to line up. You may have to do this a couple times. As long as it's not caught yet, you can still keep moving it. Looks like it's about to get caught. Then you may need to get in there and adjust the whole thing. See, as one edge starts to slip past, the other edge may pull away. So I'm going to go ahead and keep wiggling it into position. It is far from perfect the way I'm doing this, and yet it may still work. And we want to be careful at this stage not to bend the metal, because it will not function if it gets too bent. Still compressing the spring downward and wiggling it every once in a while to make sure that it's getting past the edge. Okay, once it gets close, you get back in there with your screwdriver, get it out of its own way. Don't be afraid to back off on one of them. Take your time. If it feels stuck on the groove, which it might, again, get in there. There's a little gap on one side of the ring retainer to give you a spot that you can get a little bit of leverage. And I'm going to be honest, don't be afraid to tap on it just slightly if you need to. And just keep moving it down until you see the snap ring groove is clear all the way around. You have one little tiny spot that isn't there yet. Go ahead and give it a tap. Alright, so I can see my snap ring groove all the way around. I can hear my wood generally clicking into place. I'm going to take one end of the snap ring and start it. Then I'm going to push gradually all the way around. If I don't see it seat all the way, I'm going to rotate the snap ring by pushing on one end of it. And I may need to compress the spring just slightly more to get it to. I know this might seem a little stressful. Try to be patient with yourself and with the process. Worst case scenario, if you really can't get it, move the gap to that location where you're having the issue and see if you can get it to seat past it. Alright, so that one's past it now, and the snap ring's all the way in place. You can see that it's seated. I can go around it with a pair of pliers just to double check that it's seated everywhere. Just be careful of that inner bearing, you don't want to mar it. Okay, and now that I'm sure that snap ring is in place, I could take my two clamps off. Fun. Alright, so that's the replacement of our piston seals on our front clutch pack. Be sure to get any little chunks of material, wood or anything that's gotten in there out. Go ahead and clean things back up a little bit. Hopefully all of our surfaces are still happy and unmarred. Looks pretty good. I'm just going to go ahead and put that one right back in there. All the teeth should fit the same. Thought I would show you guys how to tell the two different sets apart with a digital micrometer. So I'm going to re-zero it out. And this one was fairly inexpensive. But in any case, these ones from this clutch pack were 605. Newer ones were a little bit thicker, obviously. And the ones from the other clutch pack were more like 8. So it may not seem like a very big difference, but you definitely want to put the 4 of them that are the larger ones in the first clutch pack that we took apart. One that looks like this, and the 4 smaller ones go in this one. Definitely don't want to confuse them. And then of course we can get in there with a feeler gauge to check our clearance between the snap ring and the edge to make sure we're within tolerances. So now those have soaked overnight and they should be all the way saturated. And of course we want to do this because we need to check our clutch packs with a feeler gauge to make sure that we have the right amount of clutches and the right amount of clutch discs for it to function correctly. So we have a disc, and find that same disc. Right here. Make sure they match up and that the teeth are the same. Should be exactly the same shape. And we're going to go ahead and put our new disc in place. And then our plate. And take our used disc and set it aside. Same thing. Take a look at our discs, make sure they're the same. Take our used plate, or our used disc, put it aside. Put this one back in there. And put the plate back. You can check these plates for flatness sometimes. Put them up against a piece of glass and make sure they're still flat. Alright, and then we have our third disc. And here, make sure you find the right one. Set our other disc aside. Put that in. And then our third plate. And then our fourth disc. Right there. Looks like the right one. Take our old disc, put it aside. And then we're going to put our plate back. Might want to clean it off a little. This one. I'm going to do all this with a microfiber cloth, some sort of lint-free cloth. And then we're going to drop this in here. And we should actually be lined up right where the snap ring goes. Now I'm going to take a pick and go down in here and line these up as best I can. Sometimes a screwdriver works, but we want all of the teeth in relatively the same spot vertically. You can also use a small screwdriver. If you push them all the way up against one side, then the other side is going to not line up either. So you kind of need them in the middle as far as the two sides are concerned. But it needs to slide back onto this gear over here. And to do so, they need to be lined up. If you keep lining up both sides little by little, eventually you should end up with a situation where as you look down into it, all of the teeth on the different frictive discs, clutch discs, should line up so that you can look down past them on both sides. Okay, next we're going to take our snap ring and we're going to start one edge of it, and little by little we're going to push around and in until we see the snap ring again. Okay, so that's one clutch pack with the discs replaced. So we can take that and set it aside. Now the other clutch pack is in here. And we need to remove this snap ring. It's a slightly different shape than the other one. And we may need to push it around a little bit in order to be able to get underneath it. You can see that the short notch is not as accessible. Or you might be able to get under it with something really thin. It just depends on where you're at. But usually you need it so that the gap is somewhere you can get to it. And if it's not where you can get to it, you may need to tap it until it moves into a better location. So I'm going to just try taking a screwdriver here, seeing if I can tap it. Alright, so now that I've tapped it into position, I can get a screwdriver behind the notch in the snap ring. That may or may not get it all the way out. I might still need a second screwdriver to help me get some leverage. So I get one edge out, it might become easier. Sometimes you can just push it out by grabbing it with something even smaller. Either way, try to be patient, try not to mar up any of the surfaces. It's spring-loaded, and you're overcoming that spring-loaded part. There we go. Looking a little more likely to come off now. Alright, so once we've got it started, we can usually just keep pulling on it. And it should come off little by little. If not, we can keep going with the screwdriver wherever it is caught. And slowly move it out until we have the snap ring off. Okay, so just like the other side, take off our top disc. Go ahead and set it face down. Then we have our next frictive plate, our next clutch plate, our next frictive plate, and so on and so on. Okay, so once we've removed our clutches and our clutch plates and the back clutch plate, we want to remove this other wavy snap ring from the back here. The wavy snap ring. So again, we want to push on it until we get it into a location or we can get underneath it. Let's try to be gentle. We just want it to rotate in its same location. And like I said before, the snap ring is the same all the way around. Alright, so back at that issue of trying to get behind it or below it. We may need to get a pick in there like that. And then move it up slightly so that we can get a screwdriver behind it. Like that. We still may need a second screwdriver to really get it started. I lost my opportunity. Let's see. Okay, once we get it started, we can work our way around. It generally won't pop itself back in. Mind you, there are some springs behind it, so it's under some pressure. Try to be patient, not to bend it, not to damage it. Alright, just to take it all the way out. So I'm going to place it down so that I can put it back in the same direction. Now, here's the plate. Face it down again so I know which direction I'm in. And we have two seals on this piston for the rear clutch pack. So for the outer seal, I'm going to look at which direction it's oriented. The lip goes toward the sky in this case. I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to go over to my rebuild kit and find the seal that's exactly the same shape and the same size. Once I've found the one I feel like is a match, I'm going to go over here and install the seal on the piston for the rear clutch pack. I'm putting the lip in. Now there's an inner seal also. Actually, see, this one has a little chunk out of it. And it also has the blade or fin that sticks off of it towards the sky. Just want to get in there with a pick and pull it out. And go back over to my kit. Find the one that matches. It's the same exact size. And keeping track of which way the fin on it is. Put it back in the way it just came out. In this case, with the fin towards the sky. Just gotta put it in there exactly the way the other one came out. Takes a little bit of patience just to make sure you don't mess it up. You take a look at it and make sure it's fully seated all the way around. Just going to keep pushing one part of it in and working my way around. So I'm going to take a pick and go around the outside edge and push it down into the groove so that it's not puckered anywhere. Okay, so now I've got it seated nice and flat. I can clean this off. I've oriented everything so that it's skyward. And I can look behind it. Everything looks good in there. Put it down, still skyward. And just get in there and clean off the material. Anything that's dirty in there. And it's good I took this apart because my other piston had a little chunk out of it. Now that chunk probably came out of it on assembly. I'll clean this part off too. And to make sure we don't take another chunk out of it, I'm going to take a little bit of petroleum jelly and put it all the way around this lip before I go to install it. And then a little bit on the outside one too. Okay, it's going back in exactly the way it came out. And I'm going to angle it just slightly. And then I'm going to twist it as I put it in. And after I just get it just far enough in, I'm going to take my pick. We want to make sure that even as we install it, the lip doesn't get damaged on this seal. It's basically like a little skirt that's pointing the opposite direction of the way we're pushing to install it. So you get in there with a feeler gauge, it'll look like that. You want to keep rotating and keep checking both these seals. Make sure they are essentially pushed in flat, the correct direction. It's very easy for it to catch and take a chunk out of one of these seals. The transmission won't work nearly as good. I want to use a relatively thin feeler gauge. I'm using a .008 at the moment. And keep twisting. And keep an eye on that lip. Be patient. Take your time. It's going to come up a couple times. going to not cooperate a couple times. And this usually takes a little bit more doing than you want it to. Keep putting a little bit of pressure on it. Keep wiggling it. The center seal will probably be done before the outer seal is done. And it'll try and get caught on one or the other. Rotation is your friend once you get part of it flat, because it can help you to get the seal in there without taking a chunk out of it. You really keep an eyeball on it for where the puckers are happening or for where it's catching. Don't be afraid to pull it back out slightly. You get to a spot where it looks like it's going to take a chunk off of it. Don't keep pushing. Do the opposite. Pull it back out. Take your time. Be patient. Every once in a while, I'll take a look at the inner one. Okay, so once you get past the seal, I'm going to rotate it slightly. And put it all the way flat. And hopefully, you've gotten both those seals seated without any sort of damage occurring. Now, we're going to go and we're going to put this part back into place. We're going to reinstall the wavy snap ring, starting it somewhere and moving this all the way around until it snaps fully into place. If it's really seated, there'll be a gap at the end of the snap ring. Because it's wavy, it can seem like it's seated before it is. That's what the gap kind of looks like once it's really seated. You can see it down there. Pretty sizable gap. Alright. You do want to get in to all these spaces and clean the material. Okay, there we go. Microfiber cloth is just better, so it's less likely to leave any lint behind. Probably works faster too anyway. It's got more microscopic grit to help clean these surfaces and take off what basically amounts to powder that's created by the transmission clutches wearing away over time. Everything with transmissions is getting as clean as we can, because we don't want to clog that filter any faster than it's already going to clog itself. Or heaven forbid any little screens in the transmission. So we'll take our back plate, clean it off. Now we'll go and reinstall our plates and our frictive discs. Let's slide it back in there. Gonna take my top disc off. Make sure it matches with the one I'm going to replace it with. Go ahead and put it in there. Here's our next plate. And then here's our next piece of frictive material. Another plate. If you see any lint, definitely try and remove it. And there's our last plate. So we're definitely always going to check both of these clutch packs that I've just reassembled with a feeler gauge and make sure that they are exactly within tolerance. I'll talk about that in a minute when I do it. So as you saw before, it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to move it. I want to line up that notch where I'm going to be able to get to it next time. And then slowly work the snap ring around, snapping it into place. Splashing myself with a little bit of transmission fluid there. And maybe clean things off a little bit. Then we'll line up our gear teeth again. Just like the other clutch pack. So they look relatively straight up and down all the way around and equidistant from the edge. Alright, so that's lined up again. So there's our rear clutch pack with our new rings on there and our new seal on the inside. It's going to have to fit into this gear right here. So these Planetaries are going to receive this part. While we're at it, let's take a look at the Planetaries. So if you need to take this apart, there is a snap ring right here that begins the process to disassemble this. When you're doing a master rebuild kit, there are about 6 thrush washers in this unit that are going to need to be replaced. So as long as I have smooth, even movement on the Planetaries and this entire assembly, I'm going to not take this apart. I also don't have the master rebuild kit. I'm just doing a standard rebuild, so I don't have any of the thrush washers or the parts to replace what's in here. There's a secondary snap ring on the outside edge here that'll have to be removed if you're truly going to disassemble it. Like I said, if this piece is looking like it moves smoothly and everything rotates freely, and I can see this gear rotating freely, we're just going to put this back in the transmission fully assembled the way it came out. Alright, so there's our 2 clutch packs assembled and with new discs. Okay, so we're going to measure the pack clearance for the rear clutch pack. The clearance should be between 25 and 45 thousandths of an inch. So if it's incorrect, we're going to have to adjust the clearance with a select fit snap ring. In some instances there may be a different clearance for this. We are dealing with the 4.6 RE version of the transmission right now, so that clearance might be different on another one. So 0.045, I basically got a 22 and a 20 thousandths of an inch, so together that's 42 right there. So I should not be able to get this in there. Alright, so at 44, that's less than 45. Clutch pack has the correct amount of clearance. Doesn't have too much clearance, which is what we're really worried about. On the other end, we want at least 0.025. So I've got my 0.25, and you can see I can fit that in there. Okay, so it does have at least 0.025, so that clutch pack is within tolerance. If we go to the front clutch pack, and the information is on page, section 21-78, transmission overhaul in the dealer service manual. It says between 67 thousandths of an inch and 134 thousandths of an inch. So for 134, so we're going to take our feeler gauge, and I've got a Not sure you can see it. Got 25 thousandths of an inch. Add that to 24 thousandths of an inch. So I'm at 49. Then add 22. I'm at 71. And then I'm going to add 20. And I'm at 91. And then I'm going to add 19. And I'm at 110. And I'm going to add 18. I'm at 128. And then I'm going to pull the top one over. And that is 6 thousandths of an inch. So that's 134 exactly. So if I can fit that in there anywhere on the low part of the snap ring, it's out of tolerance. And it doesn't look like I can. There's no place that 134 thousandths of an inch will fit in there. And then on the low side, it needs to be a minimum of 67 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to take my 25 thousandths of an inch and my 24 thousandths of an inch and combine it with my 18 thousandths of an inch. So that should be 67. Just going to make sure I can push that in there on the lower part of the snap ring. There's a few places that fits in. Okay, so I know that this clutch pack is within tolerance. It's between 67 thousandths of an inch and 134 thousandths of an inch of gap between the snap ring and the clutch pack. After we've changed out the clutches, then on the shaft of this clutch pack, there are two of these rings, much like the rings on the reaction shaft, and they have a break in them that has sort of a puzzle piece shape. And like the other ones, we have to push on one side and compress it and get in there with something so that we can pull this ring open. A pick usually works pretty good. They are plastic, so they might break. In any case, we need to push one side flat and open up the other side. Since they lock together, sometimes it can be hard to get them apart. So we get one side started. Let's put a little pressure on the first side and move the entire ring up and off. There's one of them. You can see this little puzzle piece here. That's how it comes together. And then the second one works the same way. We want to compress it with our fingers, get behind it on the other side, and pull it off. The secondary one is metal in this case. Alright, so whether they're metal or plastic shouldn't change too much. As long as they are exactly the same diameter when closed, we can go ahead and slide them back into place. It's going to take a little bit of pressure to get them to move. And they're going to want to get stuck on the first ring. You may have to use a pick to get it past that first ring. And then we just keep going onto the second ring. And make sure that they can compress and that they're seated properly. Take the second one. And in the same way, we just want to stretch it open a little bit and push it into place. And that's what it looks like when it's off. Okay, if we look down in here, there's a third seal. It's larger than the other two. It should come off like so. Has a little cut in it. That's how you take it apart. Go over to our kit here. Figure out which one exactly the same size and material. In my case, this one has some little orange dots on it to help me. This is what's referred to as the clutch retainer seal ring. You can see the one I took out of there is plastic. And this one I have in the kit to replace it with is metal. You just want to open it up like that. Fit it down in there. And then we're going to compress one side and hook the other side over it. And then we're going to close it up. So it should be closed and it should rotate freely. Like I said, that's the clutch retainer seal ring. Again, once you have both clutch packs fully assembled and you've lined up the splines on the inside of the front clutch pack, now for purposes of reassembling our transmission, we're going to take our rear clutch pack and our front clutch pack. We'll flip the front clutch pack back over. Hopefully it should drop straight on there. If it doesn't drop straight on there, we're going to take it back off. We're going to take a look at which gear caught it as opposed to the other two. I'm going to line back up all 4 frictive discs. Make sure they're straight up and down. Try the same thing again. Okay. And if we feel it fall 4 times, we know it's gotten past all 4 of the frictive discs. And we can set that rear and front clutch pack aside for reassembling. That's the end of part 3 of our 42RE transmission rebuild project. We just mostly went over the clutch packs in this one. Go ahead and hit like on this video, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There is going to be another video moving on with the rebuild process and reassembly process, so stay tuned for that. It should come next in the playlist. And this is Devin Haas from Haas Auto West saying happy wrenching, and we'll see you in part 4.